Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today, we're tackling a real classic, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract. Buckle up, because we're about to deep dive into some thought-provoking stuff.
This book is like the philosophical equivalent of a power smoothie. Dense, packed with nutrients, and guaranteed to make you think differently about the world.
Okay, so before we crack open this smoothie, can you give us the quick rundown
Yeah.
of what The Social Contract is all about?
Well, at its core, Rousseau is grappling with this question. How do free individuals come together to create a just and fair society? He argues that the key is this thing called the social contract, this unspoken agreement where we give up some of our natural freedoms in exchange for the benefits of living in a society governed by laws and mutual protection.
So it's like trading in some of our Wild West. Do whatever you want freedom for the security and stability of living with rules.
Exactly. But it's not just about blind obedience. Rousseau believed that true freedom comes from participating in a system where the laws reflect what he calls the general will, what's best for everyone, not just a select few.
Okay, the general will. That sounds like a pretty important concept. We'll definitely need to unpack that later. But before we get there, let's start at the very beginning of the book. Rousseau paints this picture of the state of nature. What's going on there? Is it like a prehistoric paradise?
Not exactly. Rousseau's state of nature is this pre-society thought experiment. It's where humans are free and equal, driven by basic instincts like self-preservation and this inherent feeling of pity for others. But it's also a pretty precarious existence. There's no real protection or security. It's every person for themselves.
So it's not exactly a picnic in the park, huh?
Yeah.
I can see how that might lead people to want to band together and create a more stable way of life. Is that where the social contract comes in?
Right on. As humans start developing things like agriculture, and importantly, private property, they realize they need a system to protect what they've got. Suddenly, it's not just about surviving. It's about securing your stuff, your land, and your future.
That makes sense. If you've poured your blood, sweat, and tears into cultivating a piece of land, you don't want some random person coming along and saying, finders keepers.
Yeah.
So this desire for security and stability, that's what drives people to enter into this social contract.
Precisely. They willingly give up some of their natural freedom, their ability to just take what they want, in exchange for the protection and benefits of a society with rules and laws. It's like trading in the uncertainty and chaos of the Wild West for the relative peace and predictability of a well-governed town.
Okay, but this trade-off begs a question. Who gets to make the rules in this new society? Who's in charge?
This is where Rousseau gets really radical for his time. He says that the ultimate power, the sovereignty, resides with the people, not with a king, not with an aristocracy, but with the people themselves.
Wow. So it's like everyone becomes a mini ruler in this social contract world. We're all in this together.
That's the idea. The people collectively create the laws that govern them, and they have the right to change those laws if they no longer serve the common good. Rousseau argues that this is how we achieve true freedom, not by doing whatever we want, but by participating in a system where the rules reflect the will of the people.
Okay, now we're circling back to that general will you mentioned earlier. If the people are in charge, how do we determine what this general will actually is? It can't just be a free-for-all, right?
You're right. It's not about everyone getting their way all the time. It's about figuring out what's truly best for the whole community, even if it means some individuals have to make sacrifices. Think of it this way. Imagine you and your friends are trying to decide what to have for dinner.
Ooh, dinner. Now you're speaking my language.
Let's say you want pizza, your friend wants sushi, and another wants tacos. The general will isn't about finding some bizarre fusion dish that tries to please everyone. It's about figuring out what meal will be the most nourishing, satisfying, and beneficial for the entire group.
So it's like taking into account everyone's preferences,
Yeah.
but also considering factors like dietary needs, budget, and maybe even who did the dishes last time.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond individual desires and trying to discern what will truly benefit the community as a whole, even if it means some people don't get their first choice. Rousseau argues that finding the general will requires careful deliberation, open communication, and a willingness to put the good of the group ahead of our own selfish desires.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, but this general will thing still seems a bit fuzzy. How do we make sure it doesn't get hijacked by special interests or become a tool for those who want to control everyone else?
That's the million-dollar question. Rousseau knew that the general will could be tricky to figure out and even easier to manipulate. That's why he spends a lot of time in the social contract talking about the structures and safeguards we need to put in place to protect it. He explores different forms of government, arguing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. He even suggests some pretty radical ideas, like censorship, in extreme cases, to prevent the spread of harmful ideas that might undermine the common good.
Whoa, censorship. This sounds a little intense. Rousseau must have really been concerned about the potential for things to go wrong, even with this power to the people idea.
He definitely was. Remember, he was writing in a time of absolute monarchies and widespread inequality. He saw firsthand how power could be abused and how systems of government could be rigged to benefit a select few at the expense of everyone else. His goal with the social contract was to lay out a framework for a more just and equitable society. But he was also keenly aware of the challenges and potential pitfalls along the way.
So the social contract is like a roadmap, but with a big warning sign that says, caution, rough terrain ahead.
Exactly. It's a call to action, an invitation to think deeply about how we can create a society that is both free and just, even amidst all the complexities and challenges of human nature.
Well, Rousseau definitely gives us a lot to think about.
He sure does, and we've only just scratched the surface.
That's right. We're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive into the social contract, we'll explore Rousseau's ideas about the different forms of government, the role of the legislator, and those safeguards he proposed to protect the general will from corruption. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Rousseau's The Social Contract. Last time we set the stage by exploring the state of nature and the core concept of the social contract itself. We also waded into the somewhat murky waters of the general will.
We did, and I have to admit, I'm still wrestling with that idea a bit. But I guess that's what makes this book so engaging. It really forces you to think.
Absolutely. Rousseau isn't giving us easy answers, but rather prompting us to grapple with some of the fundamental questions about how we live together as a society.
So where do we go from here? We've established that people are in charge, but how do we actually organize this power to the people thing? Rousseau must have had some thoughts about different forms of government.
He did, and this is where Rousseau gets really pragmatic. He doesn't believe there's a single best form of government that will work for every society. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Okay, so no magic bullet for good governance. What factors does he say we should consider?
Rousseau highlights a bunch of things: the size of the state, the character of the people, the historical context, and even the climate. He then analyzes different forms of government: democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy, weighing their pros and cons.
So it's like he's saying choosing the right system.
Yes.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, right?
Precisely. Each form of government has its strengths and weaknesses. For example, he argues that democracy, where citizens participate directly in decision-making, works best in small communities, where everyone knows each other and can easily come together to debate issues.
That makes sense. Direct democracy in a country the size of, say, the United States would be utter chaos. So what about larger, more complex societies?
For those, Rousseau suggests aristocracy might be more effective, but he's not talking about the kind of aristocracy we often associate with inherited titles and privilege. He's envisioning an aristocracy of merit, where the wisest and most virtuous individuals are chosen to govern.
Well, it's like a council of elders. But they've earned their spots through their wisdom and virtue, not just by being born into the right family.
Exactly. They'd be the ones with the knowledge, experience, and commitment to the common good, to make sound decisions for the benefit of everyone.
Okay, I can see how that might work in theory, but it seems pretty idealistic. How do you even identify these super virtuous individuals, and what's to stop them from becoming corrupt once they're in power?
That's a valid concern, and Rousseau acknowledges it. He was deeply skeptical of any system that concentrated too much power in the hands of a few, even if those few were supposedly the best and brightest.
So he must have had some ideas.
Yeah.
About how to prevent this power corrupts problem.
Oh, absolutely. One of the key mechanisms Rousseau proposes is the separation of powers. It's an idea that's pretty familiar to us today, dividing government authority into different branches, like the legislative, executive, and judicial.
Right. Checks and balances, that kind of thing. But wasn't Rousseau writing way before the U.S. Constitution and all that jazz?
He was. It's remarkable how ahead of his time he was on this point. He argued that by dividing power and creating a system where each branch can keep the others in check, we can help prevent tyranny and ensure that no one person or group becomes too dominant.
It's like a three-legged stool. If one leg is too weak or too long, the whole thing topples over. You need balance and stability for the whole system to work.
That's a great analogy. And Rousseau believed that this separation of powers was crucial for protecting the general will from being hijacked. by individual or factional interests. He argued that the legislature, elected by the people, should be the primary voice of the general will, but that even they needed to be held accountable.
This is getting really interesting. So we have this separation of powers, checks and balances. Are there any other safeguards Rousseau recommends?
Rousseau was also a big believer in the importance of civic virtue, citizens who are actively engaged, informed, and committed to the common good. He even suggests that in certain circumstances, censorship might be necessary to prevent the spread of harmful ideas.
Well, hold on. Censorship. That doesn't exactly sound very freedom-loving. Isn't that going against everything we've been talking about?
It's definitely one of the most controversial aspects of Rousseau's thought. He was walking a fine line between promoting freedom and recognizing that sometimes limitations on individual liberty might be necessary to protect the greater good of society.
So it's like he's saying freedom of speech isn't absolute, that there are times when the potential harm of certain ideas outweighs the right to express them.
Exactly. But he was also aware of the dangers of censorship, being abused by those in power. He emphasized that it should be used very sparingly, only in extreme cases, where the very foundations of the social contract were at stake. It's a complex issue, and one that still sparks debate today.
It definitely does. It seems like Rousseau was constantly wrestling with this tension between individual freedom and the needs of the community.
Yeah.
Try and find that sweet spot where both could flourish.
You've hit the nail on the head, and that's why the social contract remains such a relevant and thought-provoking work. Even centuries later, it forces us to confront these fundamental questions about how we create a society that is both free and just.
Speaking of challenging ideas, Rousseau also proposes a pretty unconventional solution for times of crisis: the dictator. Didn't we just talk about how he was worried about power being concentrated in the hands of a few?
We did. And this is one of the most debated aspects of the social contract. It's important to understand the context here. Rousseau isn't advocating for dictatorship as a general form of government. He's specifically talking about situations of extreme emergency where the very survival of the state is at stake.
So it's like hitting the emergency override button, a break the glass in case of fire kind of situation.
Exactly. He envisioned the dictator as a temporary measure, a last resort when swift and decisive action is needed to save the state from collapse.
But wouldn't that undermine the whole idea of popular sovereignty? If one person can just seize power and suspend the laws, what's to stop them from becoming a tyrant?
That's the risk, of course. And Rousseau recognized that. He emphasized that the dictator's powers should be strictly limited in scope and duration, focused solely on addressing the immediate crisis. Once the emergency has passed, their authority would revert back to the regular government.
It's a risky proposition, for sure. It's like trusting someone to handle a loaded gun with the promise that they'll put it away as soon as the danger is past.
You could say that. And this is why Rousseau's idea of the dictator has been met with a lot of skepticism. It highlights the tension between the need for strong leadership in times of crisis and the potential for that leadership to be abused.
Well, Rousseau certainly doesn't shy away from the tough questions. In fact, it seems like he's intentionally provoking us to think critically about these fundamental challenges of governing ourselves.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to another fascinating concept. Rousseau introduces the idea of the legislator.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Who is this legislator? And what makes them so special? Is this just another fancy word for lawmaker?
Not exactly. The legislator, as Rousseau describes it, is a unique figure in his political philosophy. They are not elected officials or rulers in the traditional sense. Instead, they are extraordinary individuals who play a crucial role in shaping the very foundations of the state.
Okay, this is getting interesting. So they're like the architects of the social contract itself.
Precisely. Rousseau envisioned the legislator as someone with profound wisdom, insight, and understanding of human nature. Their task is to craft laws and institutions that align with the general will and guide the state towards its true purpose, the common good.
Wow, that's a tall order. It sounds like they need to be part philosopher, part political strategist, and part social psychologist, all rolled into one.
You could say that. Rousseau believed that the legislator needed to have a deep understanding of the people's needs, aspirations, and potential pitfalls. They needed to be able to anticipate challenges, design systems that promote virtue and discourage vice, and create conditions that allow citizens to flourish.
This legislator sounds like a pretty remarkable individual, almost like a superhero of political theory. But how does Rousseau imagine someone like that actually emerging? It's not like they just apply for the job, right?
You're right. Rousseau recognized that finding such individuals would be rare and challenging. He didn't lay out a specific process for selecting them, but he suggested that they would likely emerge organically, driven by a deep sense of civic duty and a profound understanding of the principles of justice and the common good.
So they're like these rare gems, these enlightened individuals who emerge from the community with a vision for a better future. It's a fascinating concept, but also a bit idealistic, wouldn't you say?
It certainly is. But remember, Rousseau was a visionary thinker. He was trying to articulate an ideal model for how societies could be structured to achieve their full potential. The legislator is a symbol of this aspiration, a reminder that wise and virtuous leadership is essential for creating a just and flourishing state.
It's like he's setting a high bar. For those who seek to shape the destiny of their communities, it's not just about power or ambition, but about a deep commitment to the common good and a profound understanding of the principles that underpin a truly just society.
And this is where Rousseau's enduring legacy lies. He challenges us to think beyond the immediate, to consider the long-term implications of our choices, and to strive for a society where individual freedom and the collective good are not in conflict, but rather mutually reinforcing.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored Rousseau's ideas about different forms of government, the separation of powers, the concept of the legislator, and even the controversial idea of censorship. It's clear that Rousseau's The Social Contract is a dense and challenging work, one that's packed with complex ideas that continue to resonate today.
Absolutely. But we're not done yet. There's still so much more to explore.
That's right. In the final part of our deep dives into The Social Contract, we'll delve into Rousseau's thoughts on civic virtue, those shared experiences that bind a society together. And that famous line, "Man is born free, and everywhere he's in chains." Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Rousseau's The Social Contract. We've been exploring the intricacies of his political philosophy, from the state of nature to the concept of the general will, and all the different mechanisms he proposed to ensure a just and stable society.
Yeah, we've covered some serious ground. Different forms of government, the separation of powers, the role of the legislator. It's clear that Rousseau wasn't afraid to tackle the big questions about how we organize ourselves as a society.
Absolutely. And today, we're going to delve into one of the most crucial elements of Rousseau's vision, the concept of civic virtue.
Okay, civic virtue. That sounds like something straight out of a history textbook. What exactly are we talking about here?
For Rousseau, civic virtue is the bedrock of a healthy and thriving society. It's about citizens being actively engaged, informed, and most importantly, committed to the common good. It's not just about following the rules. It's about having a genuine love for one's country and a willingness to prioritize the well-being of the community over one's own narrow self-interest.
So it's like having a sense of shared responsibility, a feeling that we're all in this together. But how do you actually cultivate this civic virtue? Can you just teach it in schools?
Education is definitely a big part of it. Rousseau believed that education shouldn't just be about filling our heads with facts and figures. It should also be about shaping our character, instilling in us those values of civic duty, social responsibility, and a love for the common good.
So it's like teaching kids not just how to read and write, but how to be good citizens, to care about their community and contribute to its well-being.
Exactly. But it's not just about formal education. Rousseau also believed that shared experiences play a vital role in fostering civic virtue.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of shared experiences are we talking about here?
Things like public festivals, ceremonies, rituals, anything that brings people together, creates a sense of collective identity, and reminds us that we're part of something larger than ourselves. These shared experiences help to strengthen the social bonds, reinforce those feelings of belonging, and remind us that we have a shared stake in the success of our community.
So it's like those moments when we come together as a community, whether it's for a celebration, a time of mourning, or even just a local parade. Those moments help to solidify our sense of connection and remind us that we're all in this together.
Precisely. But let's be realistic. Not everyone is going to be overflowing with civic virtue all the time. There will always be those who prioritize their own interests over the common good.
Right, human nature being what it is. What does Rousseau suggest we do about those folks who are trying to game the system?
While Rousseau recognized that self-interest is a powerful motivator, he argued that a well-structured society should find ways to channel that self-interest in ways that benefit the community as a whole.
So it's about aligning individual incentives with the common good, making it so that doing what's right for society also benefits the individual.
Exactly. But he also acknowledged that there will always be those who try to buck the system, who are willing to exploit others for their own gain, for those individuals. Rousseau believed that the state has a right and a duty to enforce the social contract and to punish those who violate its terms.
So there have to be consequences for those who break the rules.
Absolutely. Rousseau argued that laws and punishments are necessary to deter those who might be tempted, to prioritize their own interests over the common good. He believed that punishment should be proportionate to the crime and aimed at rehabilitating the offender, helping them understand the error of their ways, and reintegrate into society as a responsible citizen.
So it's not about revenge or retribution, but about restoring balance and helping the individual become a contributing member of the community again. That's a pretty nuanced view of justice.
It is, and it speaks to Rousseau's deep understanding of human nature. He recognized that people are capable of both great good and great harm, and that a just society must find ways to encourage the former, while discouraging the latter.
Now, before we wrap up, I have to ask about one of the most famous lines from the social contract. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. It's such a powerful statement. But what did Rousseau actually mean by it?
It's a line that's often taken out of context to suggest that Rousseau was against all forms of social organization. But that's not what he was saying. He was highlighting the tension between our natural freedom, the freedom we possess in the state of nature, and the constraints that inevitably come with living in a society.
So it's like we're trading one set of chains for another, the chains of nature for the chains of society?
In a way, yes, but Rousseau believed that the chains of society, when properly structured, are far more just and equitable than the chains of nature. He argued that through the social contract, we can exchange the unpredictable and often brutal constraints of a pre-society world for the more rational and predictable constraints of a society governed by laws and principles that reflect the general will.
So it's not about eliminating constraints altogether, but about choosing the right kind of constraints, the kind that allow us to live together in a way that promotes both individual freedom and the common good.
Exactly. And that's the challenge that lies at the heart of the social contract. It's a challenge that every society must grapple with, finding that delicate balance between individual liberty and the needs of the community.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today. We've explored Rousseau's vision of the social contract, the general will, the different forms of government, the importance of civic virtue, and even the role of punishment in a just society. It's clear that the social contract is a complex and challenging work, but it's also one that offers profound insights into the nature of human society and the enduring quest for freedom and justice.
It certainly does, and I encourage everyone listening to pick up a copy of the social contract and engage with Rousseau's ideas directly. You might not agree with everything he says, but you're sure to find yourself thinking about the world in new and unexpected ways.
That's what we're all about here at Books and Bytes, sparking those aha moments and getting those mental gears turning. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rousseau's The Social Contract. Until next time, happy reading.